Building a brand new computer can range from the $400 or even more, making you to go in debt, going broke, or probably starving. But why would you do that when I can help you to save money by buying used computer parts? Today I will guide you on how to buy used computer parts in a reliable and easy way to identify a really good deal, what to look into for these parts, and what to avoid. I do understand that a lot of people will always prefer to buy everything brand new. Unfortunately, a lot of us are not rich or cannot afford a $2,000 computer, but nonetheless, let's jump into these amazing tips that I will give you to buy these used computer parts and save money. So let's begin. Let's start with where can we buy these computer parts? So most of the time, I use Facebook Marketplace or eBay. What I recommend is to check the profile of the seller and see if they actually have a really good reputation or history in their profile. Let's say if a user has a really low reputation where you see comments where this person scammed me, this person didn't give me the right item, or didn't ship the item on time, I would try to avoid those people. When it comes out for Facebook Marketplace, I ask the person how long did they have the part for, did they use it for mining, what did they use it for, and how long ago they bought it. So that's going to determine which shape the part is actually in. Also, you can do the same thing on eBay where you can message the seller and ask them what's the history of the part. At the same time, how can we determine if we're getting a really good price for these used parts? And one of them will be by checking the MSRP of that specific part. Let's say if a graphics card released for $500, if the used parts is around $400, $300, then we're getting a really good deal. You can also compare prices between all the online stores and also check for open bots and refurbished items. That way you can also save money on those used parts because you can buy open bots or refurbished from really good manufacturers and big companies that are reliable and they actually tested all these components. Now we know where to look for used computer parts and how to compare the prices and even negotiate them. So now let's begin with the components. So what things should you look into a used motherboard? The first thing that I check in a used motherboard is the CPU socket. I make sure that the pins inside of the motherboard, especially if you have an Intel motherboard, the pins are not bent. Also that the latch on the socket closes properly and goes up and down properly. So in the motherboard, I check that there is no corrosion inside, such as water or liquid damage, anything like that, that there is no burnt. So you will have to check for every pin for the RGB, the USB, and the fan header. So just make sure that none of these pins are bent. Let's move on to the CPU. The CPU can be a little bit tricky to test. What I suggest is to actually get the motherboard first, so that way you can test the CPU. What I recommend to look into the CPU is to make sure that this CPU has no pins bent if you have an AMD, or that if you have an Intel, that there are no spots or anything burnt on the back of that CPU or in the bottom of the CPU. Also, if the person who is selling you the CPU is able to connect that CPU into a motherboard, you can check for the temperature by using a benchmark or a tool. Let's say if you have a Ryzen 5600X, which you're buying used, you can also use this tool called hardware monitor, and if the CPU on idle hits more than 50 degrees on idle, this means that this CPU might be overheating or something is defective. Also, if you stress that CPU and you see that it's reaching almost 90 degrees, I would recommend to stay away from that CPU. So anything that it's under pressure or stress, such as a light benchmark, and the CPU is staying below the 70s, then this CPU is safe to buy. Otherwise, do not buy it. When it comes out for the RAM, I suggest to look into a few things. One of them will be that the teeth of the RAM, it's not worn out by any means, or it's not fading or anything like that. Making sure that if you buy 2 sticks of RAM of a person, to make sure that both of them they are the same frequency, that they are the same brand. If the person allows you to run a diagnostic of the RAM, you can actually run a quick diagnostics within Windows. Just type on Windows, run memory diagnostic, and you can use this tool to run it, and then at the end it will tell you if the RAM is good or bad. And usually it can take between 5 to 15 minutes, so you can also do that just to make sure. Water cooler and coolers in general. So this one is very tricky. I do not recommend buying used water cooler or air cooler, and that's because they're hit or miss. But if you want to risk it, what I recommend is to check that this water cooler is not leaking anywhere, that you have all the plates and screws for that specific motherboard, because you can buy a water cooler with the screws that came already for AMD, but then if you have an Intel motherboard, now you have no plates, nothing, no screws to install it, so that will be a waste of money. Let's talk about storage. When buying a used storage such as a hard drive or SSD, it can be a little bit tricky because these components have a lifespan. Let's say if you have a mechanical drive that you're buying, this hard drive might be fully functional, but then tomorrow it can just fully die. The same thing goes for SSDs. You can use a tool called Crystal Disk Mark, and this tool is going to tell you the speed of that specific hard drive or SSD. The only thing that it won't tell you or detect will be if there is any defective sectors or anything broken inside of the hard drive. There are other tools that you can run to make 100% sure that the hard drive or SSD are not defective, but this can take hours and hours and hours running that diagnostics. That's why buying a used storage can be a little bit tricky. Alright, power supply. So when it comes out for the power supply, it can also be very tricky to know if a power supply works or not. I do not recommend buying a used power supply, but there is an effective way of knowing if a power supply works properly or not, or if it's providing the right voltage. And what you can do, you can buy a power supply tester, and they go really cheap on eBay, Amazon, anywhere, and you can test a power supply with this tester, and then that's going to tell you automatically right away if that power supply is providing enough current. If you're going to go on the journey of buying computer parts, then I would suggest buying a power supply tester. Just make sure that if you're buying a modular power supply, that it has all the cables that you need for your computer, such as a PCI, SATA cable, power cable, motherboard, and CPU cables. So those are the things that I recommend for a used power supply. When it comes out for buying a used graphics card, what I recommend is asking the following questions. I would recommend asking the person if the graphics card was used for mining, how long they bought the graphics card, what things did they do with that graphics card, if it was for playing video games, video editing, or anything like that. So that way you know how the graphics card was actually treated in the past. And also making sure that this graphics card, it's not dusty, that all the fans are working. Just letting you know, some graphics cards, depending on the technology or age, do not spin right away until you put them under pressure. So let's say if you turn on the computer and the graphics card fans are not spinning, you should be fine. But now if you're running games and this graphics card is not spinning at all, then that means that graphics card is defective. You can also run a quick benchmark on that graphics card. I use a benchmark graphics card, I think it's called Univalley. I will post it down in the comments below. And what I do with a graphics card, I run in different settings, such as low, medium, and high settings, and then I stress it. I think the test will take a few minutes, and then that's going to show me the average FPS, and that's going to show me also the temperature of the graphics card. So let's say if this graphics card is hitting high temperatures, more than 80 degrees, almost hitting 90s, I will skip this graphics card and look elsewhere. Last but not least, the computer case. Buying a computer case can be very simple. So what I recommend checking for a computer case will be, to begin with, the power button, making sure that it clicks, that it goes down depending on the design of the case. Also make sure that all the cables for the power are intact in there. Also checking for the USB cable. Most of the time that's going to be for the 3.0 cable. Making sure that all the holes for the USB 3.0 are all intact, all right? And lastly, I will check in this case that the front and back panel close properly, because you can find a case that is jammed, and then once you put all the components in there, this case won't close. Well, now you know how to buy used computer parts, where to look for the best amazing deals, and how to troubleshoot all of these components to save a lot of money. If you learned something new today, I would recommend to subscribe to my channel. I will be uploading more tech content and anything related to gaming. So if you have any questions, leave a comment down below. Alright, with that being said, see you in the next video. Take care.